Rich millionaire caught on a date with Mistress at the theatre, while pregnant wife sees it all. Ethan Montgomery's life sparkled with an aura of impossible wealth and unbridled power. A titan of industry, he was the envy of society, married to the beautiful and gentle-hearted Charlotte, who was pregnant with their first child. One chilly evening, while the lights of Broadway beamed with promise, fate would cast a dark shadow upon their world. An unguarded moment in a lavish theatre would unravel secrets and betrayals no one saw coming. Little did Ethan know, his carefully maintained image was about to shatter in spectacular fashion before the eyes of those he held most dear. A single night, a single mistake, and everything would change forever. Ethan Montgomery was one of the world's wealthiest entrepreneurs. Known for his involvement in high-stakes technology investments and philanthropic endeavors, Ethan had risen to prominence when he founded Montgomery Innovations, a conglomerate that owned everything from cutting-edge robotics divisions to a global chain of luxury hotels. A dashing man in his late 30s, with silver threads just beginning to fleck his dark hair, he carried himself with a cultivated confidence that bordered on arrogance. Almost every business magazine, Forbes, Fortune, Business Insider, had featured him at least once, praising his strategic brilliance and unstoppable ambition. Yet behind the scenes, Ethan had begun living a double life. His demanding schedule constantly took him to different cities, meeting investors and forging deals. It seemed plausible that a man of his caliber would occasionally indulge in private luxuries. Most chalked it up to the nature of the wealthy private jets, exclusive members-only clubs, and the hush-hush dealings that never reached the tabloids. What no one suspected, however, was that Ethan had been carefully nurturing an extramarital affair. His mistress, Juliana Park, was an elegant socialite and concert pianist with a reputation for mesmerizing audiences. Their paths had crossed during a charitable gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where Juliana performed a short classical set to raise funds for underprivileged children. Ethan had been immediately taken by her poise, her statuesque beauty, and the sense of mystery that lingered around her. Over the following weeks, he arranged private dinners, speaking to her of art, music, and eventually his dissatisfaction with a marriage that by his account felt stifling and dull. Whether he truly felt that way or sought only to justify his desires, no one knew. Juliana, meanwhile, found him irresistible. She was drawn to his power, his intellect, and the opulence he promised. Perhaps she believed she would become more than just a mistress. Perhaps she simply relished the thrill. Ethan's wife, Charlotte Montgomery, was nothing like Juliana. Sweet, gentle, and coming from a modest background, Charlotte had married Ethan for love well before his meteoric rise. She was the quiet anchor in his stormy world. If Ethan soared through boardrooms and negotiating tables, Charlotte kept their home and his heart grounded. At least, that was what she believed. Having grown up in a close-knit family in a middle-class neighborhood, Charlotte was never entirely comfortable in the realm of the ultra-wealthy. Nonetheless, she adapted for Ethan's sake, learning to navigate galas, press events, and philanthropic committees with grace. Now pregnant, she felt an even deeper bond with him. She imagined they were stepping into a new chapter, building a family that would stand the test of time. In her dreams, Ethan was the devoted husband and soon-to-be father she'd always known him to be. What Charlotte did not know was that her husband's attentions were increasingly directed toward Juliana. It began innocently, with occasional lunches and late-night phone calls under the guise of urgent business meetings. Then the gifts arrived: diamond earrings, designer handbags, and tickets to exclusive events. Eventually, it became physical. Ethan rented a penthouse apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side, officially intended to be a corporate crash pad for late-night business or entertaining clients. But in reality, it became a private nest for him and Juliana. One brisk autumn evening, Ethan decided to treat Juliana to a performance of The Phantom of the Opera on Broadway. He arranged everything in secret, a lavish dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant beforehand, top-tier balcony seats at the Majestic Theatre, and a stretch limousine to shuttle them around. Juliana was beyond thrilled. She adored musicals and had long yearned to experience one on the grand stage. Ethan knew the performance was a classic, famous, spectacular, and romantic. He intended the night to be a glamorous surprise. That same day, Charlotte was out of town, visiting her parents in Boston. Or so Ethan thought. The unsuspecting twist of fate that set the entire drama in motion was this: Charlotte, feeling unwell and longing for Ethan's presence, decided to return to New York earlier than planned. She had spent the entire morning coping with pregnancy pains and a strange sense of anxiety that she couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was just the hormones, perhaps it was intuition. Whatever the reason, she had an overwhelming urge to be near her husband. Not wanting to disrupt Ethan in the middle of a workday, she took the train to Penn Station and arrived in the city by late afternoon. A close friend of Charlotte's, Marissa Bennett, happened to have 2 tickets to see The Phantom of the Opera that evening. Marissa's date had cancelled last minute, and she invited Charlotte to come along. Although Charlotte was tired, she agreed. Maybe this was the perfect chance to unwind. She'd always wanted to see that iconic show, and she wanted to surprise Ethan afterward by showing up at their penthouse. She texted him, but he never responded. She chalked it up to his busy schedule. Fatefully, Charlotte and Marissa took their seats just a few rows behind the private balcony. It was the kind of vantage point that allowed them to glimpse the entire expanse of the theatre, from the stage to the ornate boxes above. Midway through Act 1, as the mesmerizing music swelled, Charlotte's eyes drifted to the upper levels. That was when she saw him, Ethan's unmistakable profile, leaning intimately toward a woman with long, flowing hair. For a moment, Charlotte convinced herself it was just a hallucination brought on by low light and her swirling hormones. But then he laughed in that distinct way she knew so well, his shoulders lifting slightly. The woman beside him rested a hand on his knee. Charlotte froze, her heart thudded, her throat felt constricted. She tried to keep her composure, not wanting to cause a scene, but everything in her screamed that something was terribly wrong. Marissa looked at her, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay, Charlotte? You look pale." Charlotte couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. After a few seconds, she whispered, "That's Ethan." Marissa tried to follow Charlotte's gaze. Indeed, the silhouette, the mannerisms, it was undeniably him. And he was with another woman, whispering into her ear, occasionally touching her shoulder and brushing a finger along the curve of her bare arm. From a distance, the betrayal was searingly obvious. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken, and she gripped the edge of her seat so hard that her knuckles went white. But it wasn't a dream. It was reality, unfolding like a nightmare in the middle of a public venue. It took all her willpower not to rush upstairs and confront him instantly. Instead, Charlotte sat rigid, her mind reeling. She turned to Marissa, who squeezed her hand and whispered, "Let's leave. You can't watch this." Yet Charlotte refused. She decided to wait. She needed to see it with her own eyes, to confirm beyond all doubt. Let Ethan think himself safe in the darkness. Let him think he could get away with this. Charlotte wanted to witness every moment, to burn the image into her mind so she would never waver. The rest of the first act passed like an excruciating eternity. The music soared, but Charlotte heard none of it. All she could see was the man she loved with someone else. At intermission, Ethan escorted Juliana out of their balcony box and into one of the exclusive VIP lounges. Charlotte could see them from a distance. She felt nauseous, her stomach churning with heartbreak. Despite Marissa's pleas, Charlotte resolved she would confront him right there in the theatre. They followed discreetly, careful not to draw attention. The VIP lounge was lined with plush couches and served complimentary champagne for the high-paying patrons. Charlotte peeked through the gilded double doors and saw Ethan resting a hand on Juliana's lower back while they chatted. They looked every bit like a couple in love. Meanwhile, Charlotte's entire universe was collapsing. Marissa put a steadying hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone?" Charlotte's eyes were brimming with tears she refused to let fall. He's the one who chose to do this in public. He's not even thinking about who might see him. He's not ashamed. So Charlotte stepped into the lounge, weaving through the crowd. Her heart pounded in her ears so loudly she thought she might faint. As she drew closer, she overheard a snippet of conversation. Juliana was giggling, leaning into Ethan's chest, and Ethan was promising a weekend getaway in Napa Valley after his next business deal closed. Everything about their intimacy radiated a shared secret. Charlotte's grief began to transform into cold anger. Ethan did not see his wife until she was only a few steps away. Then their eyes met, and his face drained of color. His jaw slackened, and he dropped his hand from Juliana as if it burned him. Juliana turned too, instantly recognizing the fury in Charlotte's expression. An intense hush seemed to descend over the lounge, as curious onlookers realized something dramatic was unfolding. Charlotte's voice came out quiet and trembling, yet it carried the weight of heartbreak. "Is this your business meeting, Ethan?" he stammered. "Charlotte, why are you?" Juliana, disoriented by the sudden confrontation, looked from Ethan to Charlotte and back again. She was dressed in a stunning, off-the-shoulder black gown. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and she looked every bit the sophisticated socialite. Before she could speak, Charlotte turned her blazing eyes on the woman. "And who are you?" Charlotte asked. Voice cracking, Juliana swallowed hard, trying to muster composure. I'm Juliana Park. Ethan, what's going on?" Charlotte let out a short, bitter laugh. "What's going on is that my husband, who is about to have his first child with me, thought it wise to take you on a date tonight." Her gaze darted to Ethan. "Did you think you'd never get caught?" Ethan's composure shattered. He stumbled over his words, glancing around at the onlookers. "Charlotte, please, let's not do this here." But Charlotte's pain knew no decorum. "Where else should we do it, Ethan? In the privacy of our home, while you keep sneaking around behind my back. Or maybe I should wait until the tabloids pick it up tomorrow when they see pictures of you two together." A few guests gasped, while others pretended to be absorbed in private conversations, though they were clearly eavesdropping. Marissa inched closer to support Charlotte, ready to remove her friend if she broke down. Still, Charlotte refused to back away. She was determined to hold Ethan accountable in the very place he'd flaunted his betrayal. Finally, Ethan stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Charlotte, you need to calm down." A tear escaped the corner of Charlotte's eye, though her expression remained fierce. "Don't you dare tell me to calm down. You chose to bring another woman to a show, one that I would have given anything to see with you. And you did it while I'm carrying our child." She looked at Juliana. "Did you know he was married?" "Did you know I was pregnant?" Juliana blanched. "He told me things weren't working out between you two. I didn't know you were pregnant." The sincerity in her eyes was uncertain, but she played the role of the victim. Charlotte's lips trembled with rage. "Well, now you do." The hush in the lounge intensified. Some people pretended to check their phones, but most stared in fascinated horror. It was like watching a slow-moving train wreck. A rush of adrenaline coursed through Charlotte, so powerful that she felt dizzy. Out of concern for the baby, Marissa gripped her by the arm, guiding her out before she fainted. Ethan and Juliana stood there, the once perfect date night thoroughly collapsed. Finally, Ethan followed Charlotte into the hallway, leaving Juliana behind for the moment. In the narrow corridor outside the lounge, the confrontation continued. Charlotte's face was pale, and she pressed a hand against her belly as if to shield their unborn child from the heartbreak searing through her. "You're pregnant," Ethan said, voice taut. "You shouldn't stress yourself out like this. Let's go somewhere quiet and talk." She shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "Is that how you see me? As some fragile creature who can't handle the truth? I'm pregnant with your child, Ethan, and you're sneaking around with another woman. How could you?" He tried to lay a hand on her shoulder, but she recoiled. "Charlotte, I'm sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this. You never meant to get caught." Charlotte shot back. "You think your sorrow fixes anything? The betrayal, the humiliation?" She drew a ragged breath. "You've destroyed our marriage." Ethan swallowed, struggling to find words. "No, it's not that simple. I still care for you, Charlotte. You have no idea how lonely I've felt. The pressure at work." "You've been distant," she interjected, voice rising. "I've been preparing for our baby, Ethan, trying to make everything perfect. I assumed you were working late to secure our future. I had no idea it was because you were too busy with her." He winced, his guilt laid bare. "Charlotte, I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. Juliana, she is someone I could talk to about my worries, my ambitions. It wasn't planned." Charlotte's anger flared again. "So it's my fault you cheated, because I didn't coddle your every whim, because I was too busy making a home, expecting you to be a father." He shook his head, though he could not muster a convincing denial. The guilt was etched on his face. He tried again, more softly. "I'm sorry." Charlotte's breath shuddered. She fought the urge to break down completely. Marissa hovered nearby, feeling helpless. Finally, Charlotte turned away from Ethan. She couldn't bear to look at him anymore. "I'm leaving," she said. "I can't watch any more of this. Tomorrow, I'm going back to my parents' house. After that," she trailed off. "I need time to think." Ethan reached out again, but she moved away. "We can figure this out," he said desperately. "We don't have to throw everything away." Charlotte let out a bitter laugh. "You already have." Her final words hung in the air like a death knell. With Marissa's help, Charlotte walked out, leaving Ethan alone in the opulent corridor. Only the distant echoes of the musical underscored the gravity of what had just happened. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling for the first time that his unassailable world had been shaken to its core. If Ethan hoped to contain the scandal, he was sorely mistaken. Several theatre-goers had recognized him. A few even snapped photographs in the lounge, capturing Charlotte's tear-streaked face and Juliana's horrified expression. By the time the next morning dawned, tabloids and gossip sites were ablaze with headlines. "Tech billionaire Ethan Montgomery caught cheating," "Pregnant wife confronts husband at Broadway Theatre," and "Love triangle at Phantom of the Opera Charlotte" was besieged by messages from sympathetic friends and malicious strangers alike. Paparazzi camped outside their penthouse, hoping to catch a glimpse of the stricken wife. Ethan tried calling Charlotte dozens of times, leaving voicemails in which he apologized over and over. She did not answer. Instead, she packed her belongings and returned to her parents' home in Boston, seeking refuge from the chaos. Juliana, meanwhile, faced her own backlash. Social media erupted with accusations of her being a homewrecker and a gold digger. She stayed in her luxurious Manhattan apartment, receiving deliveries of flowers from Ethan, a desperate attempt to repair their relationship, or at least reassure her she wasn't just a fling. But her public reputation took a beating, and she worried it might affect her invitations to perform at future charity concerts. The classical music scene, though refined on the surface, thrived on gossip beneath the veneer of civility. Within the corporate corridors of Montgomery Innovations, the affair was a scandal. Though many employees had admired Ethan for his charisma, they now whispered about his moral compass. Investors, uneasy about the negative publicity, pressured the board of directors to distance themselves from the scandal. Ethan's brand, once synonymous with brilliance and trust, was tainted. Public relations specialists were hired in droves to manage the crisis, issuing carefully worded statements about personal matters that would not affect the company's integrity. But the damage was done, and the once golden facade of Ethan Montgomery was irreversibly tarnished. Back in Boston, Charlotte tried to mend her shattered heart. She stayed in her childhood bedroom pastel walls and faded posters from her teenage years, barely able to sleep. Her mother, Linda, hovered anxiously, bringing her tea and urging her to talk. Her father, Gregory, simmered with quiet anger toward Ethan, already considering how to protect Charlotte financially and emotionally. Night after night, Charlotte lay awake, replaying the theater scene in her mind. She questioned her own role in the tragedy. Did she miss signs of Ethan's dissatisfaction? Could she have done something differently? Yet every time she considered blame, she remembered how eagerly she had loved him, how fully she had trusted him. She couldn't pin this on herself. One evening, Linda knocked softly on the door. Charlotte sat up in bed, tears drying on her cheeks. "Sweetheart," Linda said gently, "there's no easy way to heal from betrayal like this. But you need to think about your future and the babies. We're here for you, no matter what you decide." Charlotte exhaled a shaky breath. "I thought we had a real marriage. He used to be so loving, so attentive. I don't understand what changed." Her mother gave a sad smile. "People change, Charlotte. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Money, power, it can do strange things to a person, but you don't have to let his choices ruin you." Charlotte nodded, tears slipping down her face again. "I want to move forward, Mom, but I'm scared. I'm scared of being a single mother. I'm scared of how this scandal will follow our child." Linda clasped Charlotte's hands. "Your father and I will always help you. You're strong, Charlotte. If you can endure this kind of heartbreak, you can handle anything." Charlotte felt a flicker of determination kindling inside her. Yes, she had been blindsided, her trust shattered, but she was not helpless. She was a woman of her own mind, carrying a precious life that deserved stability and love. She resolved to begin legal proceedings for separation, if not divorce. She needed clarity, and that meant establishing boundaries. Meanwhile, Ethan sank deeper into remorse and panic. The public relations nightmare had ripple effects. A major investor who had planned on injecting a substantial sum into Montgomery Innovations' next project was rethinking the deal. The negative press had tarnished Ethan's credibility, and the investor worried about the company's stability. The board of directors demanded that Ethan step forward to address the scandal publicly, or at least come to an arrangement behind closed doors that would salvage the firm's image. Ethan made multiple attempts to contact Charlotte, leaving messages that ranged from tearful apologies to anger-laced frustration when she refused to reply. He tried to reason that their love was bigger than this mistake, but deep down, he recognized that his selfishness had crossed a line, one that might be impossible to fix. On top of his failing marriage, Ethan struggled with his relationship with Juliana. She was not exactly a consolation prize at this point. Though he had feelings for her, he increasingly viewed her as the catalyst for his downfall, never mind that he was the one who had initiated the affair. With the paparazzi hounding them, their rendezvous became more stressful than romantic. Heated arguments over the phone revealed they had vastly different visions of what their future might look like. Juliana found herself in an uncomfortable spotlight, receiving hate mail and losing respect among her peers in the music community. The once thrilling affair had grown sour, mired in guilt, regret, and the suffocating tension of public scandal. Charlotte took the first step by hiring a reputable family law attorney. She did not outright file for divorce, but instead sought a legal separation and a set of conditions that would protect her and the baby. This included financial support, a prenuptial agreement review, and a request for Ethan to stay away unless invited. Once served with these documents, Ethan realized the gravity of the situation. He had naively assumed that he could talk Charlotte into returning, or that perhaps he could brush the entire episode under the rug with enough apologies and lavish gestures. But Charlotte's actions showed him that she was serious. Ethan's own legal team urged him to settle quickly and quietly to avoid further embarrassment. The last thing the company needed was a protracted legal fight that would dominate headlines. Still, he hesitated to sign anything that might concede control of his assets. After all, a large portion of his wealth was tied up in stock options and real estate developments. Yet the more he stalled, the more the negative press mounted. The board of directors began discussing a possible move to temporarily replace Ethan as CEO, citing his personal crisis as a distraction from critical business operations. Ethan felt the walls closing in on all sides. He was losing control of his marriage, his public image, and possibly his entire empire. Although Juliana had initially thought Ethan would leave Charlotte and be with her, the relentless media scrutiny battered her day after day. She realized that even if Ethan did break from Charlotte permanently, the scandal would mar her reputation for years. Invitations to perform were rescinded due to unforeseen circumstances. Old friends in high society circles distanced themselves. Instead of being the glamorous companion to a powerful billionaire, she found herself under constant, toxic scrutiny. One evening, amid a heated argument, Juliana dropped a bombshell. "Ethan, do you think I want all this negativity? I'm losing my career over you. You promised me a better life, not a public scandal." Ethan, exhausted and cornered, snapped back. "I never forced you to be with me, Juliana. You knew I was married. We both made choices." She glared, tears welling up. "You said you were miserable with her, that you were basically separated already." "And I was miserable," Ethan retorted, though his tone wavered. "But you can't blame me for everything that followed." She clenched her fists. "I can blame you for lying. You never told me she was pregnant until she confronted us at the theater." Silence enveloped the room. Juliana realized she'd stepped into a hornet's nest without knowing the full truth. Ethan realized he was losing not only Charlotte, but Juliana as well. The world he had constructed was rapidly crumbling. Within a week, Juliana broke things off. Whatever illusions she had about their love story were overshadowed by the catastrophic fallout. She moved to the West Coast to stay with a cousin, issuing a statement that she regretted any pain caused to Charlotte Montgomery and expressing hopes for privacy and understanding. During her stay in Boston, Charlotte endured emotional turmoil that only deepened. The stress, coupled with the advanced stages of her pregnancy, took a toll on her health. One afternoon, she began to feel intense abdominal cramps. Alarmed, her mother rushed her to the hospital. Doctors noted complications that threatened a preterm delivery. They insisted Charlotte remain under close observation for at least a week, where she could receive medication to stabilize her condition and daily monitoring of the baby's vitals. Ethan found out through a frantic call from Linda. Despite his betrayal, Charlotte's mother believed he deserved to know. Within hours, Ethan chartered a private helicopter to Boston and arrived at the hospital, ignoring Charlotte's earlier demands that he stay away. He paced the waiting room, consumed by guilt and fear, silently praying for a miracle. When the doctor emerged with an update, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The situation was serious, but they were hopeful that the baby would remain safe if Charlotte stayed on bed rest. Ethan asked to see her, but Charlotte initially refused. She didn't know if she could handle the emotional strain. Eventually, at her mother's urging, she allowed him into the room briefly. What Ethan saw shook him to the core, Charlotte, pale and exhausted, hooked up to the fourth lines and monitors. The strong, vivacious woman he once knew seemed so fragile. He approached her bed tentatively. "Charlotte," he whispered. She opened her eyes, her voice weak. "You're here." He nodded. "I had to be. I'm so sorry for everything." She stared at him, tears welling up. "I don't have the energy to argue. I just want our child to be okay. That's all I care about." Ethan's voice cracked. "I do too." Silence stretched. Charlotte turned away, unable to look at him. All the anger, betrayal, and heartbreak coursed through her. She felt torn between wanting him gone forever and needing the father of her child to be there in a crisis. In that moment, all she could do was cling to the hope that her baby would survive the chaos that had become their lives. While Charlotte recovered under medical watch, Ethan had to return to New York to face a board meeting that could decide his fate as CEO. A swirl of rumors suggested that the board was considering interim leadership. Stock prices had dipped, and various stakeholders blamed the unending negative press from Ethan's scandal. The board meeting took place in a sleek, glass-walled conference room at Montgomery Innovations headquarters. The city's skyline loomed outside, a testament to the fortune Ethan had built. Yet he stood at the head of a long table, staring into the disapproving faces of men and women who once lauded him as a visionary. One of the senior members, a steel-haired woman named Loretta Tan, spoke first. "Ethan, the company's image is at risk. Key investors are wary, and we've already lost a substantial contract. We need to quell this storm." Ethan nodded, hands clasped behind his back. "I understand. I'm working with my legal team and PR specialists to..." Another director cut in. "This scandal has overshadowed every product announcement we've made in the last month. It's more than just a media blip. It's affecting consumer confidence." Ethan swallowed. "I take full responsibility for my personal actions. But I promise you they won't impact the strategic direction of the company. I ask for a little patience." A murmur of discontent traveled around the table. Loretta spoke again. "Patience is in short supply. We propose that you step aside as CEO, at least temporarily, until you can settle your personal affairs. This is to protect shareholder interests, not to punish you." Ethan's jaw tightened. The empire he had created was slipping through his fingers. "If I step aside, even temporarily, it will signal instability to the market. Can't we handle this quietly?" The conversation volleyed back and forth, with voices rising in urgency. Some members supported Ethan, citing his brilliance. Others argued that continuing under his leadership might cause irreparable damage if the scandal persisted. Ultimately, the board called for a vote. In a matter of minutes, the verdict was clear. Ethan was to be replaced by an interim CEO. He would retain his shares and board seat, but he could no longer helm day-to-day operations. The blow was crushing. Ethan left the meeting feeling numb. His entire adult life had revolved around building Montgomery Innovations, and now it was ripped from his grasp because of a personal failing he'd foolishly underestimated. Reeling from the board's decision, Ethan retreated to the penthouse that once symbolized his unstoppable ascent. The rooms felt cavernous and cold without Charlotte's presence. Everywhere he looked, he saw traces of her, a vase she'd picked out, her favorite throw blanket, the gentle fragrance of lavender in the master bedroom. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights glittered, but instead of finding solace, he felt only emptiness. Memories bombarded him. Charlotte's radiant smile on their wedding day, the whispered plans for their future child, the quiet nights when he worked late and she'd bring him coffee in the study. How easily he had discarded that life for a fleeting thrill. Picking up his phone, Ethan contemplated calling Charlotte. For once, he wanted to talk, not just about apologies, but about the possibility of rebuilding, if she would have him. Yet he was also aware that her doctors wanted her to avoid stress. If she heard of his demotion, it might upset her further. Torn between wanting to share and protect, he hesitated. In the end, he composed a text. Ethan text to Charlotte, "I'm thinking of you and the baby constantly. I want to be a part of our child's life. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove I'm still the man you married. I lost my position as CEO today. I've lost almost everything. But the only thing that matters is you. I'm here if you ever want to talk." He hit send and waited in anxious silence. Minutes stretched into hours. There was no response. Finally, near midnight, he drifted into a tormented sleep on the living room couch. Charlotte, still in the hospital, read Ethan's text in the glow of a bedside lamp. Her mother dozed in a chair by the window. The words unsettled her. Part of her felt a pang of sympathy upon learning he'd lost his CEO position. Another part of her believed it was exactly the karma he deserved. Although her anger remained, a faint glimmer of compassion crept in. She knew how much the company meant to him. Yet the memory of that night at the theatre, the sight of him and Juliana, would not fade. Could she forgive him? Should she even try? A nurse came in to check her vitals, and Charlotte forced a smile. The nurse, noticing her distress, gently said, "Stress can make your symptoms worse, Miss Montgomery. Maybe you should rest." Charlotte sighed. "You're right, I need rest." She turned off her phone. In the quiet darkness, she stared at the monitors tracking her baby's heartbeat. The rhythmic pulse provided some comfort. She remembered the vows she and Ethan had exchanged for better or worse, in sickness and in health. The betrayal overshadowed everything, but she couldn't deny that Ethan was still her child's father. A swirl of conflicting emotions, love, betrayal, anger, pity, threatened to overwhelm her. Slowly, she drifted to sleep, no closer to a final decision. A week later, once doctors cleared Charlotte for discharge, she returned to her parents' house in Boston. The tension between her and Ethan hung like a storm cloud. He sent more texts, more calls, all unanswered. Eventually, he decided to visit in person, hoping to show that he was sincere. Charlotte's father greeted him at the door with a stony expression. "Gregory," Ethan said softly, "I'm here to see Charlotte." Gregory's eyes narrowed. "You've done enough, Ethan. She's resting. She shouldn't be upset." Ethan inhaled deeply, searching for calm. "I won't upset her. I just want to talk. Please." Gregory stepped aside grudgingly. "If she wants to see you, I won't stand in the way. But if you upset her, you'll answer to me." Ethan nodded, stepping into the modest living room he knew from countless holiday visits. Charlotte emerged from the hallway, wearing a loose-fitting sweater that draped over her growing belly. She looked pale, but her eyes were steady. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, voice devoid of warmth. He took a tentative step toward her. "I came to apologize again, face to face, and to tell you that I want to support you and the baby. Financially, emotionally, any way you'll let me." She said nothing, so he continued. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. I lost sight of what truly matters. My company, my reputation, I've wrecked them. But the worst thing I did was hurt you." Charlotte's expression flickered with pain. "You think losing your CEO position is punishment enough? You humiliated me in front of half of New York." She glanced down. "I'm not sure if I'll ever feel safe with you again, Ethan." A tear rolled down his cheek. "I can't take back what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. If you'll let me." She hesitated, the conflict evident in her eyes. "I'm not ready to forgive you. I can't just pretend everything is fine. The betrayal is too deep, but for the baby's sake, I'll consider letting you be involved." Ethan nodded. "That's all I'm asking, for a chance." She wrapped her arms around her belly. "I need you to understand that forgiveness, if it ever comes, won't be quick. You destroyed my trust. You'll have to earn it back step by step." Her words, though cold, gave Ethan a spark of hope. He bowed his head. "I will, I promise." Before he left, they discussed practical details, medical bills, future checkups, and arrangements for the baby's birth. It was a frigid exchange devoid of the warmth they once had. Still, it marked a turning point, an acknowledgement that while their marriage might be shattered, their roles as parents connected them irrevocably. Though Ethan yearned to believe that sincerity and regret could eventually restore some semblance of his previous life, fate had more in store. Over the following months, multiple lawsuits emerged against Montgomery Innovations. Competitors capitalized on the company's weakened state. Former employees accused Ethan of mismanagement and unethical practices, claiming that he'd used company funds for personal indulgences. Investigations were launched into questionable expense accounts. Though some allegations were exaggerated or untrue, they painted a picture of a fallen titan who had grossly abused his power. Simultaneously, a scandal erupted around an old contract that Ethan had negotiated with a foreign tech firm, revealing that some terms skirted the boundaries of international trade regulations. Regulators looked into the deal, threatening massive fines. Ethan discovered that the board was now fully prepared to cut him loose to save themselves. He faced the very real possibility of losing not only his position, but also a significant chunk of his fortune. His once golden empire was crumbling under the weight of negative press and legal entanglements, proving that a single moral misstep, even a personal one, could unravel the foundations of a public figure's entire life. Karma had arrived in full force, delivering blow after blow. Despite these professional nightmares, Ethan pressed on with the one area he refused to neglect again: Charlotte and the impending birth of their child. He dropped everything for each doctor's appointment, sometimes driving from New York to Boston at dawn to make it on time. Initially, Charlotte kept him at arm's length, but as her due date approached, she allowed small gestures of care. Once in a while, she even accepted a ride from him. These moments were tinged with an awkward, unspoken tension, both remembering a time when they did such things as a loving couple. At last, the day came. Charlotte's water broke unexpectedly late one night. She was rushed to the hospital, where her father called Ethan without hesitation. Ethan arrived by helicopter once more, red-eyed and anxious. He raced through the hospital corridors to reach her room. Labor was long and arduous. Charlotte groaned in pain, her mother and a nurse by her side. Tears streamed down her face. Despite everything, Ethan stood at her other side, clasping her hand. She did not pull away. Hours later, through a haze of agony and effort, Charlotte delivered a healthy baby girl. The sound of the baby's first cry filled the room. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stand still. Ethan locked eyes with Charlotte, tears falling freely. The expression on her face was a mixture of overwhelming love for her child, lingering sorrow, and the faintest glimmer of something that might one day become forgiveness. When the nurse placed the baby in Charlotte's arms, she gently beckoned Ethan to lean in. Together, they looked down at the tiny life they had created. In that moment, the bitterness between them receded, replaced by a raw, shared devotion to their daughter. They named her Lillian Rose Montgomery, a name Charlotte had chosen months ago. The hospital room was filled with an air of both relief and fragile hope. Whatever storms had ravaged their marriage, at least their child had entered the world safely. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something close to gratitude. In the weeks that followed Lillian's birth, Ethan found himself plunged into a wholly unfamiliar routine. Instead of waking up in his plush Manhattan penthouse, he woke on a lumpy couch in a modest rented apartment in Boston. Gone were the days of private jets and personal chefs. Now he grabbed quick meals at the local deli and spent his evenings reading parenting guides. He never imagined he'd consult. These small sacrifices were a deliberate attempt to be closer to Charlotte and Lillian, an unspoken commitment to put fatherhood before his pride. At first, Charlotte allowed Ethan only brief, carefully supervised visits. She would sit on the living room sofa, watching silently as he fed Lillian a bottle or changed her diaper with trembling, uncertain hands. He approached every tiny routine, burping the baby, rocking her to sleep as if it were a holy rite, determined not to fail in this new role. Whenever Charlotte observed him from across the room, she felt a conflicting rush of anger, pity, and the faint stirrings of reluctant respect. Yes, he had shattered her trust, but in these quiet moments she saw a man trying with raw sincerity to mend the wreckage he had wrought. Outside the intimate bubble of parenthood, Ethan's life remained a battlefield. Some of the more salacious allegations against him fizzled out due to lack of evidence, but a few lawsuits clung on. The scandal had taken on a life of its own in online forums and social media, where critics relitigated every aspect of his downfall, from the cheating to the questionable contracts. Montgomery Innovations, under the leadership of an interim CEO, worked overtime to distance the company from the personal drama of its founder. Slowly but surely, stock prices stabilized. Contracts that had been on the fence were renegotiated by cooler heads at the top. Though Ethan was still a major shareholder, he no longer wielded the day-to-day power that once made him an unassailable figure in the tech world. Meanwhile, in sporadic tabloid coverage, Ethan's name still popped up, but the media frenzy had cooled. The public, ever hungry for fresh scandals, moved on to new celebrities and controversies. Still, whenever he ventured into public spaces, Ethan noticed lingering sidelong glances and furtive whispers. It was as if the world at large had made a mental note of his transgression, and though it was no longer front-page news, it would not soon be forgotten. Juliana Park, for her part, gave a subdued concert performance in Los Angeles, her first major recital since the scandal broke. She played admirably a haunting rendition of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, and although her technique was praised by critics, the audience's response was lukewarm. Whispers of homewrecker and gold digger still trailed in her wake. In a brief interview, she tearfully confessed to having made deeply regrettable choices and asked for understanding, but her public image would clearly take years to repair. In the classical music community, a circle that thrived on both talent and reputation, her name now carried an asterisk. Back in Boston, Ethan discovered that small, consistent gestures mattered far more than any grand apology. He offered to drive Charlotte to doctor's appointments for Lillian and paid meticulous attention to Lillian's feeding schedule. He texted Charlotte daily to ask if she needed groceries or help around the house, not just as a fatherly duty, but also in an earnest attempt to shoulder responsibilities he once arrogantly left to others. When her parents noticed, he stayed up late at the apartment, reading baby care books. They allowed themselves a shred of cautious optimism. Perhaps this humbling experience was transforming him in ways no luxury or corporate triumph ever could. One evening, after Lillian finally fell asleep, Ethan ventured to speak candidly with Charlotte in the dimly lit kitchen. He apologized once more for the hurt he had caused, but this time he spoke less about his own sorrow and more about her emotional toll. He recognized how vulnerable she had been, pregnant and blindsided, forced to rebuild her world while carrying his child. His voice trembled with genuine remorse. Though tears rose in Charlotte's eyes, she offered little verbal response. Still, she didn't shut him out. She listened. That, in itself, felt like a tiny step toward atonement. Slowly, something shifted between them. Charlotte remained resolute in her plans to formalize a separation. She had made that clear. Yet she also began to see that Ethan's transformation might be real. Late at night, as he paced the living room, cradling Lillian against his shoulder, she glimpsed a side of him she thought had vanished, caring, selfless, and patient. Once, he caught her watching him with the baby and offered a timid smile. Her chest felt heavy with conflicting emotions. He'd inflicted wounds that might never fully heal, but perhaps he could still be a good father. For Ethan, these fleeting moments were the only light in an otherwise tumultuous horizon. Legally and financially, he was still in precarious territory, but every time Lillian curled her tiny fingers around his thumb, he felt a wave of renewed purpose. It hit him that all the millions in the world couldn't buy the sense of fulfillment he found in his daughter's quiet breath against his chest. And so, piece by piece, Ethan began to rebuild, or more accurately, to build anew. He no longer held illusions of returning to his old life. That door had slammed shut. But he dared to believe that a different life, smaller in scale, humbler in spirit, could be meaningful in its own right. His redemption was not a momentary revelation. It was a slow, stumbling climb. Night after night he wrestled with old habits of pride and self-pity, only to be reminded by a late-night diaper change or a soft coo from Lillian's cradle that he had a reason to keep trying. As the weeks stretched on, Charlotte's stance gradually softened from ice-cold distance to a careful civility. They still lived apart, and she insisted on continuing the legal process, but she let him visit more often and even accepted occasional rides to her family's gatherings. She said little about the possibility of forgiveness, yet each moment of kindness, a faint smile, a polite nod of thanks felt like a treasure to Ethan. It was, in many ways, an imperfect redemption. The ghost of his betrayal still haunted the corners of every shared conversation. But in that haunting space, Ethan found not only guilt, but also a profound lesson. He realized he had spent years chasing success at any cost, never pausing to ask if it truly enriched his life. Now, in the messy, unglamorous reality of fatherhood, spit-up stains and sleepless nights, he found a spark of hope that no corporate trophy could ever match. And though Charlotte might never again call him her husband in the same loving tone she once used, she did watch these quiet efforts and wonder if, maybe, second chances weren't always a lost cause. If nothing else, she admitted to herself, this was better for Lillian. A father who showed up, even a flawed one trying to atone, was more than many children got. In time, she'd see if his remorse was fleeting or genuine. For now, Ethan Montgomery stood on the brink of a different life. It was not the life he had meticulously planned or built with his billions. It was uncertain, painful, and humbling, a far cry from the days when his word was law in the boardroom. But for the first time in years, he sensed a fragile sense of purpose that had nothing to do with prestige and everything to do with the kind of man and father he might still become. At last, roughly 6 months after the dramatic confrontation at the theatre, Charlotte decided to have a candid talk with Ethan. Sitting at a small kitchen table in her parents' home, the two faced each other. Charlotte held Lillian in her arms, gently rocking the baby to sleep. Charlotte started quietly. "I wanted to tell you that I'm filing for divorce." Ethan's heart clenched, but he nodded. He had sensed this day would come. "I understand." Charlotte's eyes softened. "You and we can't go back to the way things were. Too much has happened. I can't trust you in that way anymore." He swallowed hard. I know. I deserve this. She caressed Lillian's tiny hand. But I want you to be a father to her fully, not just on weekends or holidays. If you're willing, I'd like to co-parent. I believe Lillian deserves the love of both parents. His eyes misted. I want that more than anything. I'll do everything I can to be there for her. For a fleeting moment, their gazes met, united by the love for their child. While the marriage was beyond repair, a shared devotion to Lillian offered them both a path forward. Perhaps not the happily ever after that Charlotte once envisioned, but a new reality that might contain peace and purpose. "Thank you, Charlotte," Ethan whispered, "for giving me a chance to be in her life." She gave a small nod, tears brimming. "Just don't ever break her heart like you broke mine." He promised he wouldn't, and they both knew how high the stakes were. Thus, the final stage of Ethan's downfall became the beginning of his humbler, more uncertain future one, in which he was no longer the untouchable billionaire, but rather a flawed man struggling to salvage the most important relationship of all, fatherhood. And so ends the tumultuous tale of Ethan Montgomery, a man whose wealth and power blinded him to the one treasure he should have valued above all, the love and trust of his wife Charlotte. In the blaze of a very public affair and a brutal unraveling, he learned that every action carries a consequence, and no amount of fortune can shield one from the fallout of betrayal. As he steps into a new life, shaped by humility and fatherhood, Ethan discovers that redemption is a long, winding path, one he must travel step by painstaking step. Thank you for joining this journey of passion, heartbreak, and the harsh winds of karma. If you found this story gripping, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps bring more stories of drama and life lessons to the screen. Until next time, cherish what truly matters.